So I thought to mark the end of Queer Art Show 5, to mark the end of Pride Week, I get my Pride Week started in here, setting up Mile Black Paper, so I thought it would be nice to finish it here. I didn't get to the vigil yesterday for reasons of total exhaustion, but I do always like to mark that occasion. This piece in particular is obviously influenced by Act Up New York and the zap that they did in Mile Black Paper. Like that the AIDS vigil is about now worldwide AIDS, but this piece is so influenced by the queer AIDS experience in New York in the 80s that's what my particular vigil will be about, just to speak to this piece. It's called Iris, Sarah, Terry and Patty. It's just a series of readings and then a piece of music. So thank you all for coming. This book was given to me by Monica Pearl, who I'm sure you all know, who's a member of Act Up New York. Monica co-edited and wrote some of the pieces in this book. It's got an essay by Cruz, who's a huge hero of mine, who was an activist and a writer and a sex worker and an Act Up icon. This is an excerpt from Iris's essay, which is called Sex, Drugs, Rock and Roll and AIDS. I remember seeing the prostitutes on 3rd Avenue. I started getting high with them, and before long I was out there turning tricks. I thought it was great. I had enough money to take care of both my heroin habit and my child, to maintain an apartment on East 14th Street. I walked to work at night. By this time I was taking courses at the School of Visual Arts and shooting up before school in the bathroom. My daughter was attending daycare, which was affiliated with the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, because old habits die hard. I thought I was doing all right. During this time I started writing, and I got a job writing columns on drugs and sex for men's magazines. This was in the mid-1970s, and drugs and disco were considered very chic. All the good parties had lines of coke on the coffee tables, and sex clubs were making millions. The party continued, same faces, different drugs. My drug use escalated, I dropped out of college, I sent my daughter to San Francisco, I kept writing. My editor set up a meeting with a woman who was organising prostitutes on the West Coast, and she asked if I was interested in reviving Pony, Prostitute of New York. My best friend had just been found nude under the Brooklyn Bridge, her throat cut. We used to watch each other's backs out on the stroll. Hookers needed to be protected. Since it was obvious the police and government thought we were expendable, I became a spokesman and did all kinds of interviews. A few years passed and my drug habit became the only thing I was interested in. I lost my apartment. I was basically living in shooting galleries. I was hustling. I looked and acted like your basic run-of-the-mill junkie, 26 arrests, 2 of them for assault. I meant it when I said no one was ever going to come beat me. This was a very exciting time in my life. Too bad I wasn't there to experience it. I had a boyfriend I really did love. I just wasn't wild about myself. So there was someone to watch my back and get high with, but I was tired. It was about this time I started noticing a lot of my friends were getting sick and dying. When I had to be hospitalised for inflammatory disease, the rage kicked up again. I returned to the streets with a vengeance and became La Blanca Loca, the crazy white woman. I was given 1.5 to 3 years. I kicked all the drugs in jail, complete with convulsions, vomiting. I hated being locked up. I copped to a program after spending 8 months dealing with insanity the New York State Department of Corrections is notorious for. It was time to start over. We started losing people in the program, and the enemy finally had a name. It was AIDS. After I left treatment, I took a course and got my license as an emergency technician. I've been drug-free for some time. I worked as an EMT. After years of disruptive behaviour, I really felt I had to pay back for the fact I was still alive. I used to transport AIDS patients a lot. I was the only one that didn't give the dispatcher a hard time. By this time they found out the disease wasn't airborne. It was only transmitted by fluids. I would wear gloves, but I refused to wear a mask to transport AIDS patients. Emergency room nurses would run all kinds of guilt trips about what I was bringing home to my family. I once had a big fight with a charge nurse after I suctioned a patient in the ER with PCP. He was left for over an hour. Medical staff on the whole resented AIDS patients. The feeling was that they were faggots and dope fiends and deserved what they got. By this time I knew what the signs were. I knew I was positive for the AIDS virus. I was still working, even though I was tired all the time. Finally I had a patient go into cardiac arrest in the back of an ambulance. The man had a urinary obstruction, he was semi-comatose. I panicked. I started CPR without a mask. I found out later he had tuberculosis. A few weeks later, I had to be hospitalised. I got out of the hospital 90 days later looking like a national AIDS poster child. I spent 10 months getting my weight and strength back. I felt like a germ, back to feeling ugly and unloved. I didn't want to be touched because I felt unclean. In this society, women's bodies are unclean. They have to be deodorized before they're acceptable. So now, on top of everything, I was diseased. My mother wouldn't hear it. She kept hugging me, despite the fact I shied away. My first time on a train, I sat looking at lovers and families and thinking these options are closed to me now. Would they still sit next to me if they knew I'd had AIDS? I started attending a group for women with HIV. I felt like the only woman in the world with AIDS. It was all gay white men, but this group changed that. I discovered other women with the virus, black women, white women, Latinas, rich and poor women, addicts and transfusion women, mothers and sisters and lovers and daughters and grandmothers, militant lesbians. Some were Republicans. Imagine that, Republicans can get AIDS. We were all connected by this virus. I learned there was still a lot of love left in me. The rage mellowed. I was diagnosed with AIDS 2 years ago. I attended the women's group until the leader left, and then I took over along with my best friend Helen. A few months ago I started a group for bisexuals and heterosexuals dealing with HIV. I do AIDS outreach, I teach safe sex. The rage that burned is now a hot anger. I've been to so many funerals. I'm tired of the newly diagnosed being made to feel dirty. I'm tired of my people being neglected and left dying. My child is 19 now, and we're very close. The legacy I want to leave is for her to remember her mama as a survivor. She survived drugs. She survived her own worst enemy, which was herself. She taught others survival. She may or may not survive AIDS, but she kicked ass while she was here. Iris died in 1991. She was 37 years old.